Hi there, I'm Andrea Koppel, and it's time for coffee, the podcast where you get to hear firsthand what the jobs and careers that interest you the most are really like. Hey there, Java junkies. Welcome to another K-Cup mini episode of Time for Coffee. By the way, K-Cups come in 3 sizes, single, double, and triple shots, or roughly 1 minute, 5 minutes, or 10 minutes in length. So if you don't have time to throw back an entire caffeinated career conversation, these K-Cup mini episodes of T4C can give you a quick caffeinated fix, whether you're on the go or you only have a few minutes to binge. So grab your mug and take a chug, because it's time for a caffeinated career double shot K-Cup with my guest, Steve Taylor. So I just have 2 final questions for you. And I try to ask all Time for Coffee guests these questions. In particular, if you could share a time in your professional life, Steve, when you struggled, maybe you failed, as so many of us have, but most importantly, how you picked yourself up and the lesson that you may have learned in the process.
So I think one of the biggest failures that I experienced was leaving the military. I was 31 years old, and most of my peers had left college and they entered the workforce at 21, 22, and I was 31, 32 entering the workforce for the first time. And I moved from Washington, D.C., where I was at the White House and finished grad school, moved to New York City to work at a nonprofit. And the nonprofit was focused on helping military veterans transition from military life to civilian life and working on public policy issues specific to mental health and education. And at the end of the day, it wasn't a good fit for me, and I wasn't a good fit for them. And there's lots of reasons for that. I probably went towards something I thought I wanted to do, but it wasn't a good fit. I also was working on my grad school thesis at the time. So every day I went to the office, learned a new job, worked an 8-9 hour day, went home and went across the street to the Starbucks on the Upper East Side and worked on my graduate school thesis. At the same time, my dad had a minor stroke. He lives in California, and my girlfriend at the time was living in Europe. And so I was stretched way too thin. I had way too much on my plate. Mentally, when I was at work, I really wasn't mentally there. And within 2 months, my boss fired me. And I say fire, I wasn't let go. It wasn't downsized. I was fired for not performing. And it was probably one of the most difficult experiences I've ever had. I mean, here I am. I had a successful college experience. I was in the military. I worked at the White House. I had a graduate degree. I had all the tools in the toolkit that you would think one would need: a loving, supporting family, great friends. But I was struggling, and I was struggling mentally with my transition out of the military. I was going to counseling at the time to help with the transition. I was suffering depression, had anxiety. But getting fired was, while a very difficult experience, was probably one of the most formative experiences of my life. And because of the way I was fired, the executive director of the nonprofit called me into his office and said, "We're letting you go. You didn't meet the expectations." And then he sat down with me for another 35 to 45 minutes and talked me through his transition from the military and how hard it was, and that he empathized with what I was going through. He also recommended 2 things. He says, every time I'm in a difficult time, I always pick up the book, The Alchemist.
Oh my gosh, I'm rereading it right now.
Are you? Yeah, I've read it. I've read it several times since this conversation. And he says, every time I'm having a struggle, I reread that book, and the lessons from that book help me get through whatever I'm going through. And then the second thing you said is find mentors. Find mentors to help you. You can't be successful. You can't be successful, let alone survive, without people helping you along the way. And oftentimes I've been guilty of this myself. You have to hold people accountable. And when you let people slide and you don't hold people accountable, you don't do them, you do them a disservice. You're not doing them any favors. And so when I got fired, while as difficult as it was, he handled it professionally. He was kind, and he left me with several lessons, which I still carry forward on this day. And what I learned from that experience was that while I had been successful professionally and personally in my life up to that point, that I had limits. And I'm moving to a city, I'm changing jobs, my girlfriend's in Europe, my dad in California has a medical condition, I'm working on a graduate school thesis. I was at my limits, and I was doing my best to sort of bring things under control. And there was too much on my plate, and I cracked. And so that was the lesson I took from that experience. I also was at Lyft for 4.5 years, and I left in December of this past year, and I took 4 months off. I deliberately didn't want to work for 4 months, and I found the current job I'm in with Luke, working at Fixt through an introduction through the founder of Lyft, John Zimmer. John Zimmer put us in touch 2 years ago. Luke and I had kept in touch, and after leaving Lyft in December, Luke and I reconnected right before COVID hit, and I interviewed with Luke, got the job as COO at Fixt. And leaving Lyft, a company that I had helped build the business in the Mid-Atlantic. And when I left, I had 200 people that I was looking after, and I had built amazing relationships, and I had, in a lot of ways, put my fingerprints over, on the business here on the East Coast in a meaningful way. And so much a part of my identity was tied to the experience that I had at Lyft. And leaving it's like a divorce. It's like a breakup. It's really, really difficult. Your identity is caught into that experience. And fortunately, I had developed a network similar to the way I did when I left IAVA, or I had left the nonprofit in New York. It was after leaving New York, I found John Jensen. I found the guy John who helped me get the job at PRTM. Similarly, after I had left Lyft, I reconnected with Luke. And I think this goes back to you have to build a network. This goes back to the conversation I had with the executive director of Reading the Alchemist, finding mentors, leveraging mentors, building relationships, because you never know when you're going to need them. And it's been in the darkest times of my professional and personal life that I have needed people the most. And oftentimes, as luck would have it, that's when people come out. They come out of the woodwork when you need help. And I've just been really fortunate in my career to have friends and mentors that help me along the way.
Thanks for tuning in to this K-Cup mini episode of Time for Coffee. If you want to listen to our entire caffeinated career conversation, please check out the show notes for this episode. Thanks so much for listening to Time for Coffee, where the professionals in the jobs that most interest you always have time to grab coffee 24/7, no matter where you live. I have one quick favor to ask you. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to Time for Coffee. Thanks so much.